Have you ever met someone who is 40 years old on paper, but the moment things don't go their way, they react like they're 7? Not in how they look, not in how they talk, but in something quieter, something underneath. Maybe it's the way they handle criticism. Maybe it's how they disappear the second a relationship asks for depth instead of excitement. Maybe it's the tantrum hidden inside a very adult sentence. And here's the strange part. Most of these people are successful, articulate, even charming. You'd never guess, just by looking at them, that emotionally they stopped growing somewhere around adolescence. This isn't about age. It never was. It's about something psychologists have been quietly studying for decades. Something so common that almost everyone has met someone like this, and yet almost no one can explain why it happens. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the psychology of people who never emotionally grow up. Think about it for a second. Physical growth is automatic. You don't have to try to get taller. Your body just does it. But emotional growth is different. It doesn't happen on its own. It requires something uncomfortable. It requires facing pain, sitting with failure, tolerating being wrong, and slowly building the ability to regulate yourself when life doesn't go your way. And here's what nobody talks about. Some people never get the chance to build that ability. Not because they're lazy, not because they're bad people, but because somewhere early in life, they learned that discomfort should be avoided, not processed. Imagine a child who cries, and instead of being soothed, is handed a tablet to distract them. Imagine a child who fails, and instead of being taught how to sit with disappointment, is told it doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. You're still the best. Imagine a child whose big feelings were never named, never validated, just quietly shut down because they were inconvenient for the adults around them. None of this looks like abuse. In fact, a lot of it looks like kindness. But psychologically, something important gets skipped. Because emotional maturity isn't built by comfort. It's built by supported struggle. A child needs to feel a hard emotion and have someone stay with them through it, not rescue them from it. That's how the nervous system learns. This feeling is survivable. That's how the brain wires the belief, I can handle discomfort. If that step gets missed, something curious happens. The body ages, the job title changes, the bank account grows. But underneath, there's still a nervous system that never learned how to sit with hard feelings. And when that person, now 35, 45, 60, hits conflict or rejection or disappointment, their body reacts exactly like it did back then. Not because they're choosing to be immature, but because that pattern was never updated. Researchers who study attachment call this an internal working model. Basically, a blueprint for how relationships and emotions are supposed to work, built in early childhood, and then unconsciously replayed for the rest of life, unless something interrupts it. But wait, it gets even stranger. Because emotional immaturity doesn't usually look like a toddler throwing a tantrum. It looks sophisticated. It wears adult clothing. It shows up as someone who is brilliant at logic but can't tolerate being disagreed with. Someone who gives incredible advice to friends but can't apply any of it to themselves. Someone who says all the right things in an argument, and yet somehow you still end up feeling crazy for having feelings at all. Have you noticed how some people can talk about emotional intelligence fluently and still be completely unable to practice it? That's not hypocrisy. That's a gap between the thinking brain and the feeling brain. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for reasoning, planning, and self-control, can understand emotional concepts perfectly well. But when the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, gets triggered by something that feels threatening, like criticism or abandonment or shame, it can override that reasoning almost instantly. For someone whose emotional development stalled early, the override happens fast and hard, and often without them even realizing it's happening. This is why you can watch a grown adult, mid-conversation, seem calm and articulate one moment, and then suddenly shut down, or lash out, or vanish completely the moment something touches an old wound. It's not that they're pretending to be mature the rest of the time. It's that maturity, for them, only exists until it's tested. Now, here's the part that reframes everything. We tend to picture emotional immaturity as anger, yelling, blaming, drama, but often it looks like the opposite: silence, avoidance, disappearing when things get serious. Some of the most emotionally stuck people you'll ever meet are also some of the calmest, quietest, most agreeable people in the room. Because their strategy isn't explosion. It's escape. Think about someone who ghosts instead of communicating. Someone who agrees to everything in the moment and then resents it later. Someone who can talk about their childhood in therapy language and yet still can't apologize without turning it into a debate about who's really at fault. That's not manipulation, at least not usually. That's a nervous system that never learned a basic skill: how to stay present during emotional discomfort without either attacking or fleeing. Psychologists sometimes describe this as a kind of frozen development. Not regression, because that implies going backward. This is more like a room in the house that was simply never finished being built. Everything else in the person grew up around it: career, vocabulary, taste, responsibility. But that one room, the part responsible for processing hard feelings, stayed exactly as it was at age 9 or 13 or 16. And here's what's genuinely fascinating. This is often invisible to the person themselves. They don't feel emotionally young. They feel like they're reacting appropriately to whatever situation is in front of them. Because from the inside, an old wound firing doesn't feel like the past. It feels like the present. It feels completely justified. This is where memory becomes important. Emotional memories aren't stored the same way factual memories are. You don't consciously recall the exact moment you learned that vulnerability was dangerous or that needing something made you a burden. Instead, that lesson gets encoded as a feeling, a bodily response, ready to fire whenever something similar shows up later. So the person isn't lying when they say, "I don't know why I reacted that way." They genuinely don't know. The reaction is older than their conscious memory of it. But here's the twist that changes how we should think about all of this. This isn't a character flaw. It's a developmental gap. And developmental gaps, unlike character flaws, can actually be closed. Just not the way most people try to close them. Most people try to outthink the pattern. They read the books. They understand the psychology intellectually. They can explain attachment theory beautifully at dinner parties. And yet the pattern keeps repeating because insight alone doesn't rewire an emotional response. Understanding is necessary, but it's not sufficient. What actually creates change is something much less glamorous. Repeated experiences of staying present through discomfort, instead of avoiding or exploding, slowly teach the nervous system a new lesson. This feeling won't destroy me. I can tolerate this. I am allowed to feel this and still be okay. Every single time someone does that, even in the small moment, they're quietly finishing that unfinished room. This is also why healthy relationships and good therapy can be so powerful. Not because someone gives you the right answer, but because they stay with you through the hard feeling without punishing you for having it, and without rescuing you from it either. That experience, repeated enough times, is literally how emotional maturity gets built at any age. Which means something important and honestly, kind of comforting. Emotional maturity was never really about age in the first place. It was never really about time passing. It's about accumulated reps of feeling something hard and staying with it anyway. Some people get those reps early, through supportive, imperfect, but present caregiving. Some people get them late, through hard relationships or therapy, or simply choosing, as adults, to stop running from what they feel. And some people, sadly, never get them at all, and spend their whole lives wondering why the same emotional scene keeps replaying with different people wearing different faces. If you've ever caught yourself reacting to something small, with a feeling that seemed way too big, that wasn't weakness. That was an old room in the house finally being noticed. And noticing it is the first step toward finishing it. Maybe that's the real definition of growing up. Not becoming someone who no longer feels things intensely, but becoming someone who can feel intensely and stay standing anyway. And that idea, staying present with a feeling instead of running from it, connects to something even more surprising that most people get completely backwards.